We welcome you. It's always a delight. And if you ever listen to my podcast, about a year ago or so, um, Linda would graciously consented to letting me talk with her there. And now we get to hear from her uh, joyfully today. Take it away, Linda.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. Happy International Women's Day. Um, I want to, I think maybe just share some things that are on my mind because I imagine they might be on yours too, with everything that's happening in the world and especially with the outbreak of this war on Iran. Um, so I guess I have four texts to share. One of them, David already mentioned. It's my book, Palestine 1492: A Report Back, which is actually available to read for free on the publisher's website, chapter by chapter. And there's the main argument. There's a couple arguments in the book, and one of them is about just how borders function today, how they've been functioning for 500 years, tracing it back to 1492 for the with the first borders, to argue that these nation state borders, these borders, they're borders that contain land and treat land as an object of property and actually enslave the land. So they are plantations. That's how they're treated in effect. And borders are peace agreements between the plantation overseers so that they don't fight each other, so that they can dominate the earth and the land. That's one piece. And then with Palestine, I have a chapter that I'd like to share today. It's called The Last Crusade. And this is something that this is based on my dissertation. I did a geography PhD at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And initially, I was going to study the Mexico Guatemala border. But while I was in my ancestral lands in the Maya world at the border, I got the call to go to Palestine. So it also explains the cover of the book, which you might recognize more familiar in a more familiar orientation this way, which is the Maya world is here, the Caribbean. It's just that the orientation is with east at the top, and it has a Maya altar and compass that also shows east at the top. It's when we pray, we always face east first, and then west, south, and north. And something really interesting about Maya geography is that there are 7 directions, not 4. So there's east, west, south, north. There's also sky and earth and you. So all of us are in the land. We are part of the land. And so it's a nice corrective from colonial geography, which understands the land to be separate from humans. So humans above the land, and then the cartographic imagination of colonialism is that man or humans are above the earth and can cut it up as objects of property to be managed and to be controlled. So with the Last Crusade, that chapter, The Last Crusade, and you're right, David, I don't get enough churches asking me to come speak, but I would love to. And I think maybe now, it, I think maybe now it's kind of something that is becoming more mandatory. I think if we're listening to Trump supporters, people who had supported Trump, and these are big names like Tucker Carlson, Sagar Angeti, Candace Owens. I was listening to Tucker Carlson the other day, and he was just shocked to hear about the third temple prophecy that is underpinning so much of this war. He was shocked about it. He hadn't heard about it. And, just as a recap, that Christian Zionism is fueled in its support for the state of Israel because it believes in a biblical prophecy of the end times that is interpreted in a literal way, where Jews need to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem for the third time, the third temple, and then Jesus will come back and usher in the end of days. So Tucker Carlson, many people are just waking up to the fact that the Secretary of War's tattoos, his crusader tattoos, are real, that he means it. And so in this book, I have a chapter called The Last Crusade, because when I was studying Palestine, I went to study, how did Palestine get these borders? How did it get cut up from Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt? Because those cuts are new. They're only dated from the First World War. They're not since time immemorial. And the conquest of Palestine, of Jerusalem, was understood as the last crusade. And in fact, Christopher Columbus himself, in sailing west in 1492, was seeking Jerusalem, was seeking to take Jerusalem after Granada had fallen, the last Muslim stronghold in the Iberian Peninsula, which fell on January 2nd, 1492. And Columbus was there in Granada witnessing it, and had a conversation with Queen Isabella about taking Jerusalem next, but needing to go west because toward the east, the Ottoman Empire was there and Constantinople had just fallen, the last seat of the Roman Empire. So the last crusade, from World War I until today, is that has been understood as the final crusade from Western Christendom into Jerusalem. And so what we're seeing now, and what we've been seeing actually for the last 80 years, and in this book, you'll see like the ways that Holy Land rhetoric was deployed. And the Bible was used as a field guide, especially the book of Joshua, to delineate the geography of the Holy Land that eventually gave Palestine this shape that we know today. The accident of history of why it ended at the River Jordan rather than going on both banks, the East Bank and the West Bank. And then, just the shrinking of Palestine that happens. And the chapter wants to emphasize that the Golan Heights, Syria, this part has been occupied since 1967, but our mental maps look at only Palestine, that shape without it. But it's really important to not lose sight that parts of Syria have been occupied since 1967. Because if you look at the patches of some of the Israeli soldiers, this is a map of Greater Israel, which is this. It is the idea that the land of Israel biblically is from the river Tigris and Euphrates over in Iraq at the Gulf, modern day Iraq, over to the Nile. And so what Israel is doing right now, encroaching onto Lebanon, encroaching onto Syria, it already has Jordan through a comprador relationship with the monarchy, and Iraq, it has been completely destabilized. So the war in Iran is for a Greater Israel project. And so these questions about spirituality are really key in understanding the Palestinian struggle, and not just the Palestinian struggle, but the regional struggle. And also, of course, the question of Islam in this. So I hope that if you haven't picked up the book, I hope that you do. Again, it's free. I'll share the link in the chat. It's free to read. If you want a hard copy, you can purchase it. You can also get it, or you can request it at your library. It's available at the LA Public Library. I'm trying to get it available at the Ventura County libraries, but so if folks want to call their libraries, it's really nice to hold. And it was designed. I designed it precisely so that we can show maps, like as if we were in the parks. And something that I like to talk a lot about is the second argument that I make in this book. And that is that what I'm seeing in terms of pattern recognition in global struggles over the last 500 years is that there's a specific energy circulation and the Zapatista rebels, who are Maya, indigenous Maya rebels in the south of Mexico, in Chiapas, they talk about it as above and below. And this is something that is very colloquial to us, like the haves and the have-nots, that, whenever we're in relation to each other, we're taught to rank each other in terms of who's superior and who's inferior. And it can be in terms of phenotype, it can be in terms of education, the type of house you live in, the type of car you drive. Like, everything has to be ranked in terms of there's superior and an inferior, and nobody wants to be inferior, nobody wants to be below. And even like in politics, we hear this a lot in Washington circles: you're either at the table or you're on the menu. And then no one asks, why does it have to even be that way, that anyone's on the menu? So then we get taught that if we are below, if we're getting crushed, we don't want to get crushed. So then we have to go above. And we have a lot of these, these sayings, these idioms and metaphors about, moving on up and going up the ladder, and, raising the family up. It's very much about this kind of logic, this kind of energy flow of above and below, where if you're above, you don't want to go below, and if you're below, you want to go above. Except that when we go above, there's still a below that's being crushed, and that is a highly unethical position. And I think that the question of ethics is really important for us to tackle, which is why I appreciate spiritual communities, especially because these questions are front and center, whereas in many secular communities, we're taught that the political, don't talk about politics, don't talk about, even the weather. Like, you can't talk about anything because like in an ethical way, because that's all relegated to the realm of religion, right? So economics is and science, right? Those are all secular. They don't have an ethics, right? That you go have your conversations with God over there, right? And so it has been the modern world has separated this question of ethics into the realm of the religious or the realm of the philosophers, but not something that we need to tackle in everyday life. And it's something that we absolutely need to tackle in everyday life. Everyday life, we're relating to each other this way, above, below. So ethically, shout out to the Zapatista women on this International Women's Day, because it's from them that we learn that in their fight against patriarchy, where women are below, right? Where men are given all the rights and women are given all the responsibilities, like in those extremes. They don't want to flip the relations of domination. They don't want women above and men below. They also don't want a world without women, without men. They don't want to cancel men. They just want to be side by side like this, and they say that together and side by side as the women that we are. We don't want to have to become like the men in order to have rights. We want to be respected as the women that we are. And so something really central to the book, and this is toward the end, kind of like they help us map an escape along with the Black radical tradition of escape from the plantation, the maroon societies, the quilombos, of instead of being stuck in this closed world, this closed logic of you're either above or below, how about we escape and we go side by side, by side, by side with all our difference, where what the women also say is that we are equal because we're different, meaning that there's no standard for equality, like you already are equal. The moment we introduce a standard for equality, we've introduced inequality. So if we just begin with the premise that we are equal because we're different, then we also understand the power of our difference. And this, again, in everyday life, in Maya communities, the way children are raised is by understanding that every child is going to have a unique gift, and it's up to the community to allow that, to facilitate that child in developing their own gift. So you get to be the most unique you possibly can because a community creates the conditions for that. So it's not an either or of the individual versus the collective. It's both at the same time, working in harmony. So so that's in this book, and something that I also bring up in this book is this question of war, of course. I bring up the Art of War, which is another book I'd like to call in today by Sun Tzu. It's a book that's 2,500 years old, and this one in particular is translated by a United States Marine. And I'm reading it. I just started a podcast syllabus where I'm talking about books and texts, radical texts. It's called WW4, World War IV, WW4, a podcast syllabus. And we're reading The Art of War slowly. And the reason why I think it's important for us to read this book is because we don't get taught, we don't talk enough about, we don't sit together enough to talk about strategy. Like, what's our strategy in getting free? You know, we know tactics, we know how to put out fires, right? We know how to like deal with emergencies. But in terms of like why it is that we're doing all of that, if we don't have a strategy, then we're working within the strategy that's dominant, the strategy of empire, right? So we need to have a strategy in order to move from the dominant world into another world, which I like to call, after the Zapatistas, a world where many worlds fit, a world where all worlds fit, if we want to have that intellectual exercise. So how do we get from this world, from the dominant world to this world, right? Especially if a lot of us are in the dominant world. Excuse me. This is where strategy is really important. How we need a strategy outside of the dominant world. For the Zapatistas, that strategy is that when they organize, whoever's in a leadership position obeys the greater collective. They call it to lead by obeying, or to rule by obeying. So they flip it around where like our rulers we're used to being told what to do, commanded, right? Rule by command. No, this is rule by obeying. So then it's a different circulation of power. So we can understand this as a more harmonious, balanced circulation of power that respects difference, that other world that we want. And then the dominant world is the world that annihilates difference, crushes difference, co-ops difference, absorbs difference, right? But all at the service of maintaining this world. So you can have like a multicultural above, which is what happened after the Second World War with the United Nations, right? And then now we have, instead of the colonial overseers with a European face, now they look like us, right, at the United Nations. So that's a way of making a multicultural above, where you still keep, though, this logic, because only some can go above, only some, not all. So strategy, then, we need a strategy for circulating power side by side, rather than contributing to the circulation of power that we do whenever we participate in this closed world, right? And then how then do we decide how to relate? And one thing I want to say is that there's a dominant world, and there's also other worlds already existing, right? They're some of them are struggling to stay alive. Some of them need more, are new. Some of them are old. Some of them are all collections. We can talk about what a world is. It's also a really beautiful exercise of philosophizing together. What are worlds? So when we have a dominant world, it means that our energies are going to that world to reproduce that world. So how do we take our energies out of that world to reproduce a different world, the world that we want, right? And that's where strategy and tactics are really important. So the strategy has to be outside. The tactics are, when do we go in there? We go in there for harm reduction, for subversion, right? To pull out material resources, excuse me, to pull out material resources, but all at the behest of the strategy. We need a strategy outside of empire, is what I call this logic. We need a strategy outside of empire to see how we're going to deal with empire. Right. And if we don't have a strategy outside of empire, we're going to keep living, and everything that we're doing is within the logic of empire. So if we could conceptually understand ourselves outside of that, that our goal is out here, our hearts are out here, our energies want to contribute to here. And we do this simply by treating each other with respect, with our differences with respect, like, you know, rather than competition. This is competition is the logic over here of the above below world, of the dominant world. So strategy and tactics. And that's why Sun Tzu is important to read. This is a book of strategy. The Art of War is a book of strategy, and it's a text that was not shared with the soldiers. It was shared only with the generals and the king, because they didn't want the soldiers learning anything but tactics, because if they learned strategy, they might overthrow the generals and the king. So what we learn in this book, and it's actually it's a very short book, but usually you find it very thick like this, because there's all kinds of like commentary and introduction. It's very, very ancient text. This one in particular, this Marine who translated The Art of War, he also translated Mao Zedong's On Guerrilla Warfare, and talks about that in the introduction. And just talking about the first chapter, I just want to call in the first chapter. That chapter 1 is called Estimates, which can also mean like calculations or reckoning. And what it is estimating when there's a war, who's going to win. If you can assess who's going to win a war, according to Sun Tzu, if you can assess 5 fundamental factors. 5 fundamental factors in order, according to commentators. The order is important. The first one is moral legitimacy or moral influence, which in the original classical Chinese is the Tao, which means the way, the right way, right? So the first fundamental factor of assessing who's going to win a war is who has the right way, who has that moral influence. The second is the sky. The sky is the climate, it's the seasons, it's the timing. The third is the earth, the terrains, the distances. Like already right away, we could see that with Iran. The United States is trying to dominate the skies. Iran is resisting. And what Iran does dominate is the earth, which is why the US wants to have ground troops in there and is trying to get the Kurds to do its dirty work for it, promising them a state. This is what's been going on for the last 500 years, at least, this kind of relationship of dividing and conquering globally, for sure, a lot longer than 500 years. So the fourth is the command, the quality of the command. And then the fifth is the doctrine or the discipline, the quality of the soldiers, the quality of the organization. And when I think about those 5 fundamental factors, I think about how I do a lot of work with number 1, with the moral influence piece. I think a lot of us do. And I don't spend enough time thinking about the sky or the earth or the command or the discipline, you know, and I wonder, and I was thinking about this, like, especially in our struggles against ICE, you know, like in Minnesota, I was actually thinking about these 5 fundamental factors, how like the sky, the weather was on the side of the people, of the ice, the snow, right? And that, and the way that they were organizing on the ground and how decentralized they were. And so I feel like it could be a really good practice, at least for me, is what I'm trying to do. And I think that it's such an accessible text, The Art of War, that I think that it would be really helpful if we could be conversant in war, because we need to defend ourselves. This is key in the work that I do. We study the art of war so that we can defend ourselves, but we need to be careful that we don't become like them, that we don't become those monsters, that my teacher, my Maya teacher in Guatemala says that we don't become infected, you know? So how do we study war? Because what's being done to us is war. We need to defend ourselves, and we need to create something else. Something that I'm working on a text, it might be a little book. It's The Art of War in conversation with the milpa. The milpa is known also as the Three Sisters Garden, the Native American garden of the corn, the beans, and the squash and other plants. But like famously, it's the corn, beans, and squash that get planted together, which is something that we don't see in the geography where we're at in Chumash territory, where it's all industrial agriculture of the same plant and everything like in a perfect row. The milpa is not that. The milpa is three plants at least planted all at the same time, and they're supporting each other. So the corn is the leader, is like the heavy feeder on the soil. And that's like, you know, the corn, the maize is central to the Maya world and to a lot of Mesoamerican worlds. The beans, they are like a vine and they trellis on the corn stalk. And what's really cool about beans is that they give uh, nitrogen from the air into the soil. So they feed the soil, they fertilize the soil. And then the squash crawls on the soil and has big leaves, and so it protects the soil from drying out and from weeds growing. And that's kind of how they're known. Like the corn is the leader, the beans are the giver, and the squash is the protector. And there you see three very different plants collaborating to create something way bigger than them, right? That's where like difference is our power. And I'm writing a text that's in conversation with Sun Tzu and the milpa, calling it the art of the milpa. Because in that way, I feel like with the plants, we can learn that we can collaborate, right? Rather than be at war with each other through that competitive logic. And the last two texts I just want to call in. Speaking of war, and this is what the podcast is named after, the Fourth World War. So this is a compilation of the Zapatistas' writings on global capital since the 90s. And it's bilingual. It's the original Spanish on one page, perfectly aligned with the English on it, the other side. That also helps with the language comprehension. And it's also available for free, and I'll share the links as well. And I'm bringing it in because I feel like with the anxieties about World War III, I think the anxieties are right. And I also want to point out that there's been anxiety that World War III is going to break out ever since World War II ended. And it was actually called the Cold War, which was World War III. World War III already took place. It's called cold because it's from the perspective of NATO and the USSR. So it's really important that we understand that, like, when we're waiting like for them, Columbus and them, to call it World War III is happening, like we're on their calendar, like we're on their textbooks. Actually, I don't know if y'all are filing the Epstein files, but now we're finding out that Ghislaine Maxwell's father owned McGraw-Hill textbook company that we all grew up reading, right? So we got to write our own textbooks. Like, we got to start now. We can't be accepting, you know, their history, their bookmarks, their frameworks. So they call it the Cold War. They're talking about themselves. They're not talking about how the rest of the world experienced, especially Central Africa, Central America, and South Asia. So the Fourth World War, according to the Zapatistas, began the moment that the Third World War ended. The moment the Cold War, the badly named Cold War, ended, when the Soviet Union fell. Whereas during the badly named Cold War, during the Third World War, we had a war that looked like states in competition with other states for the makeup of the world. So it was like the communist bloc versus the capitalist bloc, right? And so that war was a competition between them to see how the whole world was going to have to live, right? So both of them imposing on everybody their own way. So already that's the politics from above. Soviet Union and NATO are both politics from above. They don't respect difference. They want to impose their own way. Soviet Union loses. And now I remember in the 90s, remember when globalization was a big buzzword, capitalism had won, supposedly, right? And that's why when the Zapatista uprising broke out in 1994, it was a shock, because it was a shock to them above, because they thought that capitalism had won and nobody was going to resist anymore. So here come the Zapatistas, and that then like starts like this, inspires like this whole chain of events of like the WTO protests in Seattle, the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre, and like more global movements. And in those conversations, they were talking about the Fourth World War. The Fourth World War is a war where it's capitalism versus anything that gets in its way, especially and including indigenous peoples, land defenders, communities that do not treat land as private property, communities that won't sign off their land to mining concessions. So instead, what happens is that nation states kick out the native people, continue kicking out the native people from their lands together in Latin America, sadly, with the cartels. They terrorize people from the land in order to create a good business climate, in order to have private property rights, in order to mine and to extract. And so the Fourth World War is what we're living now. And what we see is another characteristic about it is that nation states themselves they're not resisting capitalism. They're fine. China's fine with it. Russia's fine with it. Almost everybody is fine with capitalism. That's not the problem. The problem instead becomes just the United States, as if that's as if taking down the United States is going to take down capitalism. We're already seeing that what it's doing is it's transferring over to the BRICS. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have added their BRICS Plus. BRICS Plus now includes Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Ethiopia. And that's as of January 2024, right after the Tufan. So what the BRICS wants to do, it's not against capitalism. It's against US dollar hegemony. What the BRICS wants to do is it wants to create an alternative currency using commodities that back that currency, versus in the United States, the US dollar doesn't have any commodity backing it. It doesn't have gold backing it anymore since the 70s. BRICS wants to create an alternative currency that has commodities backing it, such as gold and oil. Where is that gold coming from? It's coming from, for example, the Sudan. The UAE is complicit, is driving that genocide in Sudan for the gold of Sudan. So we're going to continue seeing genocides. We're going to continue seeing dispossession. This is not a fight against capitalism. What's happening with NATO versus the BRICS? This is not. Everyone agrees capitalism is okay, and that's the problem. Because when we understand capital, and there's a whole chapter in my book that I call Capital, where I define what I mean by capital, because I think it's important for us to define our terms, because when we don't define them, we can start to argue without really needing to argue, because maybe we agree. So with the Fourth World War, it's a war where capital doesn't have resistance from above, it has resistance from below. And now what the Zapatistas are saying, and in their encounters, I was just at their encounter in August in Chiapas, and I was able to present to them the book, and it was very well received. They taught us though how to they had a whole day where they did workshops on how to live without capital. Like, we need to learn how to live without capitalism, which is basically like how we're going to actually really escape, because we're so dependent on it. And so they taught us how to build a house in one day using all natural materials, just in collective, and we have a lot of these ancestral traditions that we can relearn from, right? And I think that that's how we are going to be able to shelter from this storm. This storm is here. And the question for us below is, how are we going to shelter so that we can live for the day after? Because no one else is going to come and save us. The rich are already creating their bunkers. You know, they, in the Epstein files, apparently the 3 million that were released were only 2% of the files. And so everyone's asking what's in the files that they're not releasing. And what seems convincing to me is depopulation plans. And I'll say this, and I'll wrap up about this globalization piece because I love to hear your thoughts. In the 1990s, I was studying business administration, and so I heard globalization all the time, and I thought I knew what it was. And I remember at the same time that our own professors were telling us that if everybody in the world were to live in the lifestyle that people in the United States have, we would need 4 Earths. And now that number is up to 5 Earths. In other words, there's not enough Earth to sustain the lifestyle that the United States has, or these Western countries have, you know, for the planet. There's not even one planet enough for these lifestyles as we're, you know, learning now. And so what I've been hearing over the last 30 years when it comes to questions of climate is too many conversations focusing on overpopulation, as if that's the problem. I remember in Ventura College, there was even a conversation, a whole presentation several years ago. And one of the presenters focused on overpopulation as the problem, and then pointed us to a website. And I go to the website, and the poster child of overpopulation is a little boy named Walid out of Gaza, who was born in Gaza. And so these kinds of codes make us understand what they mean when they say overpopulation. Who they mean, right, is overly populating this planet, right? And so we gotta really recognize that in the eugenicist emails and Epstein's emails, they have plans to get rid of the majority of the people. This is actually how they speak in public, right? So we need to understand that's how they see us. We need to understand capitalism is transforming the worker out of existence. It's now with automation, right? Or with finance, right? And so who's going to take care of us is going to be us. And so earlier, I think, Nia, if I may call you out, I'm sad. You were talking about how you were having visions of of networks, spider web. That's exactly what I think about when I think about a geography of struggle, right? I'm working with some friends to help build a video game that is connected to the real world. And the video game incentivizes you to go talk to an elder, go plant a tree, go share some seeds, right? To actually not just contribute to our own communities, but also to build our shelter and network that with others, with other land bases. Because I think that in a network, like a spider's web or like a net, if we network each other's little worlds, the difference of our worlds is our power. So for example, like if our seeds burn down in our geography, but we've shared many seeds with many other geographies, those seeds are still alive, right? And it's our difference in that sharing, in that collaboration. That's our power. So I'll just leave it there because I'd love to hear from you all. I'll share those links in the chat right now.
I'll let Linnea go ahead and ask you questions or respond to you. But first, I'm going to say that, you know, Diane and I, when we sit down and watch news, we don't watch, you know, state-sponsored, corporate-sponsored news. It's always independent media, but we will check out, you know, things like I'll read aljazeera.com, but that's state sponsored, but at least it lets us know what they are thinking. And I'm saying this to say, Linda, if you had like a YouTube show, we would watch you every day. I mean, every day. So anyway, think about it, Linnea.
Thank you so much, Zowie pal. That was a lot. I just feel like more than anybody else, you've thought this through so thoroughly, connecting all those dots and offering solutions and hope. Um, it's pretty exciting. Um, Now, did you say that we already have the links to those books in the chat?
I just shared Palestine 1492, and I'm about to share.
Okay.
I'll share the Art of War also and the Fourth World War.
Well, just a trivia question too. Is the art of war, isn't that where we get the phrase know your enemy?
Oh yeah, know yourself and know your enemy.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I thought so. I've never read it though, but interesting. Yeah, we have to know what they're up to. Um, I have so many questions, but I know everybody else does too. I'll just open it up right now for questions, comments. I know you're bursting at the seams. It's hard to organize thoughts. Scott, I knew it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Linda, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It was just you're remarkably smooth and brilliant when you spoke to us, really. Look, I before you even talked about it, I'd written down the words United Nations as I listened to you. Uh, I'm on the board of directors for the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. And one of our big deals is how do we push the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons? And that treaty has been signed, I guess, over 100 countries, except for all the ones with the nuclear weapons. They have not, and that includes the United States. And I guess that's really always in my back of my head. My question for you, though, is I'm looking at the United Nations, and I also think there's a possibility that it might be bankrupt this summer, thanks to the United States. Maybe they've changed that. But how meaningful is the United Nations in your mind at this point? And I'm even wondering if it's capitalism that is undermining the United Nations. But I don't know if you want to speak to that. And I may have been too esoteric, but that's what you have to say. Okay.
Thank you for that. I don't, when I think about the United Nations, all I can think about is how can we be governed by clean water? How can we be governed by clean air and clean soil? Maybe that's what we need to focus on. I think this could be an opportunity now that the United Nations is falling. We need to have an alternative though, because the Board of Peace is supposed to, Trump's so-called Board of Peace, right, is supposed to replace it. And that's something that I think about with, when we think about the right way, the Tao, the moral um, influence piece is right now. I've never seen the United States this way, or even much of the world this way. The moral influence, moral legitimacy is gone. It's gone, and we're gonna need an alternative now. Like, this is where it's up to us to do it. This is very urgent, that we need to create a new way forward together and open up that path so that it could be collective and it can be really different. I think there's so much thirst for that from what I'm seeing. I've never seen it this way.
When you say you've never seen it this way, it makes me wonder. I had a conversation with Dr. Dave Friday, and I remarked how well we were conditioned through our lifetimes to think that the U.S. were the good guys, and especially it's in school as kids, and he said, well, maybe we used to be the good guys, and I thought, well, I just remember as a kid watching westerns and always pulling for the Indians. I mean, every time I watched, I mean, they typically lost, but I was wanting them to win. And so something in me has always said that we were not the good guys, or the US was not the good guys. So how does that stand up to what you were saying about the moral authority is gone?
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense as a
Yeah.
question?
I think that's right. The country does not believe the United States is the good guy anymore. I mean, it's down to the personal level, and in many ways a diabolical read, of I don't know how deep y'all have gotten into the I'm so deep in the Epstein rabbit hole, and I think it's really important because this is how we hit at that legitimacy. It's already, there's a critical mass of people who are paying attention, even though it seems that not a lot are, I think.
I see Clint.
Yes. Thank you so much for your share right there. You know, okay, I'm a little bit of how about this? The Art of War. I know so many people when I was in prison would read this book, The Art of War, and I always go back to this. Why did God make some of us have our lives be the way they were? You know what I mean? I come from a life where there was some violence involved. You know what I mean? And I was taught that. I was taught that, you know what? You always fight, fight, fight. And this illusion of what America is. Let me say something. The facade of America. So even with every stupid idea that ever came forward of colonialism, there was the illusion that there was a redemption that could happen. You know what? That we were able to own our mistakes and then amend them. So there was some sort of a hope before. Unfortunately, the facade is gone. The wizard, we can see who the wizard is. And the Epstein files are a huge part of that. Because it really does show the big web behind it all.
Yeah.
That capitalism is just a cancer to society as a whole. And it's very important that the natives step forward because guess what? The indigenous are the ones who knew how to steward the land to begin with. And once we can get that shift, I was talking to Pastor Moore about this a few years ago during the George Floyd. This has been years now. But the thing that Julia started with, the 20% of the population who's very empathetic, the 20 of that's very narcissistic, and the people in the middle, the bell curve, I feel, is shifting towards the empathy side. And unfortunately, what we're witnessing right now is that narcissistic side is seeing its demise and is doing what it can to try and keep that hold of it globally. But globally, we're standing up against it. And so I'm glad to see farmers picking up the art of war because the truth is, you can go and look at that old man and the grandchild sitting in the field and they're farming, and then they take their break to go learn Tai Chi. And the grandkid goes, why do we as farmers need to learn about war? Why? Because guess what? If you're in the field, you might not get in a fight with corn, but it would be horrible to be in a war and not know how to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you for your message.
No, thank you. I think that's key. I was, in Zapatista territory in August when I presented the book. There was another conversation being had about pacifism that was that seemed to, for the Zapatistas, seemed to be frustrating them. Like, you need to understand why we need to defend ourselves, kind of thing, right? Like, yes, we want peace, and they say constantly, we have an army so that there will be no more armies. We don't want to be soldiers. To be a soldier is to be not fully human because you have a weapon in your hand, and might makes right in that case, right? We don't want to. We want to be able to be fully human, and right now we can't because we need to fight. We need to defend ourselves, right? So we need to get it to a situation where that is needed less and less and less. And I also do think that, and thank you for the emphasis, Clint, on capitalism. A lot of the right wing that's reading the Epstein files isn't blaming it on capitalism. They're blaming it on Jews, right? This is really dangerous. Like, we really need to understand this is systemic, right? That this is not just about one group, which is like the easy way out. It's like turning it to fascist all over it, like continuing with the fascist logic of like scapegoating, right? So we really need to emphasize systemic, and that it's something that all of us become, or are none of us are immune from. Like we can become infected by it, seduced by it. Like there's a lot of seduction with capitalism, right? To keep it going, you know, like as we're talking right now about gas prices, like we've been talking about this as a country since Iraq, at least, and before, you know, our with a focus on gas prices, and not really caring about all of the blood on the street, you know, in the Middle East for those low gas prices. So how can we ask ourselves, how could we live without having to care about gas prices? How could we live without, you know, having to care about gas? Like those kinds of questions. So like, again, we really need to be at our best, and we can be. That's like the beauty of being human, is how much we can problem solve and really do beautiful things. Throughout history, we've done horrible things and beautiful things, right? We're capable of everything. So what kind of world can we build that favors toward those beautiful ways of being that we're capable of being, and doesn't reward this sociopathy, which is basically capitalism rewards non-empathy, right? Sociopathy.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you. Um, Julius, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you for this powerful message, Professor. I want to take off where Clint and you left off with capitalism. And we must remember that capitalism was born in blackness, born off of the labor and the land of Africans and their intellectual work, and also off of the land of the indigenous people and genociding them in the Western Hemisphere. Um, and there was a mention earlier that with the Epstein files, there's an opening for elevation of consciousness to um, the diminishment of whatever moral plane the Western, uh, what we call the West, ever had. And I think really it's a shift, however gradual, towards where the consciousness of Black people have always been about the purported moral superiority of Western civilization. And what Dr. Moore mentioned as a child watching those the cowboys and Indians, it's channeling that Black understanding that Black folk have never thought that the West were the good guys. And Dr. Horn mentions this, that when World War II broke out, there were Black Americans doing drills in Mississippi, not to help the Americans fight the Japanese, but they were hoping that the Japanese were going to invade and they were going to join the Japanese army against the real enemy. And you can see that through line through to Muhammad Ali, who was drafted to go to Vietnam and said, I'm not going to go fight no Vietnamese. I'm going to fight my enemy right here. So Black people have always been clear. We did not need the Epstein files to figure out what this is all about, because when Africans were enslaved, imagine the sexual deviancy was happening to our young people in that system of capitalism. And you can see we have the receipts. The receipts are in front of you every day when you look at Black Americans in their various hues and colors. That was born on rape of women and children. Okay, and it's the erasure of that memory why people are all of a sudden shocked that this capitalist system allows creatures like Epstein's. And there are multiple Epstein's with multiple schemes ongoing as we speak. But it is not surprising to Africans and Black people about the depravity of this system of capitalism that the West foists on us and puts itself on a false pedestal of moral superiority, which is now completely exploded. And we have to be careful in this moment to not let this opportunity slide away. Because if it's not handled correctly, it will go in the direction that you mentioned, Professor, of just blaming one specific group and then moving on to something else. I heartily was um, um, enjoyed your intervention with Sun Tzu and the different domains of resistance and thinking strategically and not just staying in the space of morality, but understanding that this fight has various domains and different people may have different specialties and not allowing one group that has a specialty, let's say in discipline, clobbering the heads of the people that are focusing on the moral plane, right? And some people might have a gift of command and the moral group might be going, well, that's all nonsense. We got to focus on just morality and detach from our situation. No, we all have a role to play, and we all have different gifts, and that should be respected. Thank you for your intervention on climate change, because that is like a Trojan horse if it's not handled correctly, right? The power elite view climate change as a vehicle where where their solution is depopulation, which is anti-human, right? Climate change may be real, but don't fall for all of um, the solutions that are presented to you. And an example of that is Mr. Elon Musk, who was a favorite of the so-called environmentalists until he showed his true colors, right? Which was always there if you looked at it. But because he was making these so-called green vehicles, he got a pass, and you created a monster. All right. So strategic blunders have serious consequences. Right. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you, Julius. And Shanti, we'll get to you as soon as Dr. Quiquivix has a chance to respond to anything.
No, yeah, thank you. Just Julius, right on. You're absolutely right that Black people are not surprised at this at all. At all. And unlike David, as you would watch the Cowboys and Indians, like I was trying to be a good kid, so I would root for the Cowboys, like I was a good student, right? It wasn't until I met the Palestinians that I was like, oh, you could be a bad student. You could say no. um and another, I mean, a very clear example, and this is very, what I'm about to bring in the room is really triggering, but the cannibalism that is in the Epstein files. Black people are not surprised. And why? Because that's exactly what took place in the plantations. There's a book that I didn't know about that I just started reading. It's called The Delectable Negro. And it talks about just the systematic ways of, and so Black people, the Black community is holding our hands right now as we're, because I understood cannibalism. We have an elder who wrote a book called Columbus and the Other Cannibals, which I reference. It focuses more on the metaphorical part, which is, and it's also the very physical material part, which we get from the Delectable Negro, which is something like, those are things that we really need to reckon with and not go around, right? Because that's the reality. And actually in the back, at the end of my own book, I bring in Black struggle, as if we're going to talk about a world where many worlds fit or a world where all worlds fit. Let's start with the world that doesn't fit, right? Let's start with Black struggle, because we can't be leaving that one till the end. We got to start with the one that doesn't fit. So thank you so much for that, Julius, for bringing all that in.
Very, very beautiful. Yes. Poignant. Anyway, go ahead, Shanti.
Hi, my name's Ian. I'm here with Shanti, sharing the Zoom with her.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't change the name on the Zoom. Thank you, everyone. I feel like there's so many beautiful threads and like important analysis of all the crises that we're facing here. And yeah, thank you, Julius, for centering what you centered. And I feel like the main question I want to ask to Linda here is yeah, your focus on changing the sort of the paradigms that we're organizing under, from the above and below to the side by side. I feel like, yeah, that's so important, and I'm really called to, particularly after what's happening with Iran, that sort of framework of building the life-sustaining ecosystems and the network so that we can operate outside of this, terrible capitalist structure. And I'm just sort of wondering if there is like, with the strategy that you're learning through Sun Tzu and other people's, like, if there is already some sort of like organizing network or strategy that you see operating, particularly within, a nation that we're in, the United States, in the imperial core, that is something that people can build on, to defend those life-sustaining ecosystems, and also to, like, you know, yeah, step away from this monster that's attacking so many other peoples around the world. Um, and also, if not, just like, I know that like the onus is kind of on each of us as individuals in the system to separate ourselves and to build those. It's not like, just go and find the place and follow it. But yeah, just if you have any examples or any work that's already going on in that realm. Thank you.
For that. For in the United States, it's small, but it seems to be growing through like the mutual aid networks. I think that's like probably like the phrase that, yeah, like it's called autonomy in other places, but like in the US, I think it's what's more like using this phrase of mutual aid. It's really like those practices of mutual care. I don't know if there's anything that is really connecting in terms of like land-based struggles. I know that there's like networks of like movements, but I'm not sure how land-based they are. There is a globally though, for us to maybe learn more about. In the chat, I just shared the global tapestry of alternatives, which is a global way of trying to weave movements around the world. So the ways that they organize is that they have an assembly, and then they have facilitators and stuff. So I think, and they share the ways that they organize it. They share the organizational structure. So that could be an example to help inspire us of what it means, because it does mean organizing. Usually when we say organizing, we think protesting on the street, but that's mobilizing. So it's really important to know the difference between mobilizing and organizing, right? Like organizing is organizing for that other world, like the material life, the spiritual life, like the mental life, the emotional life. And a lot of it is behind the scenes, a lot of it is relational. Mobilizing is a tactic of organizing. Like, oh, we need to be present on the street for this thing, right? But that should be a tactic of the bigger strategy that is organizing, right? So organizing, a lot of it is going to look like how, how like raising children is a thankless, non-Instagrammable kind of job. It's like that. It's relationships. It's sweeping. It's sometimes gardening. It's a lot of different things. So yeah, it really is just about how our everyday lives are going to be sustained by ourselves and each other. That's organizing. So the video game that we're trying to do is like a way just to get that as like a popular concept out in the world, right? There's also big questions of secrecy though, right? Like of the Art of War, if we can distill that book by one word, the Art of War is deception. That's what it is. It's deception, right? And that's what we need to understand. And actually on this International Women's Day, I would be remiss if I did not mention the origin story of this book. The legend is that when Sun Tzu came to one of these rulers and told him that he had a way that could guarantee a win, he had like this whole way of fighting war as an art. The king said, well, I'll believe you if you can get my concubines in line. And so he tried to get them in line, like disciplining them, and they were just chuckling and giggling and making fun of him. And so then he told the king, well, I could do it, but you're going to need to give me free reign. And the king said, what's that free reign? He says, I'm going to have to kill the two leaders, the women, the concubines, the leaders of the concubines. And the king said no at first, but then Sun Tzu did it. He chopped off their heads. And then after that, the women got in line. So, right, this that they use women as an example of the art of war being effective right, is something to ponder. And also, it helps us remember that war is that it is the ultimate extreme form of violence onto someone else, right? And so we got to be very, very careful when we engage in war. We got to understand that the reason why we're studying it is not because we want to become like them, but because we want to predict what they're doing to us so we can defend ourselves while we're building something else, right?
Before we close, Linda, thank you for that. Before we closed, um, can you say something about how Iran has been? I mean, around the world, the people support Palestine, but states have been slow to do that, including Arab states and Muslim states. And Iran has been the sole supporter of Palestinians, along with the Houthis, which are also Shia, a different kind of Shia, but still, they can you say something about how that plays into this whole global situation that we're dealing with?
Mm-hmm. You know, for maybe about 10 years ago, I started to recognize I was studying empire and realized empire doesn't care what the face is, it cares about reproducing itself. So 100 years ago, nobody would have guessed almost that Europe was going to be the great defender of Jews, right? How things change, how things can quickly change according to empire's tactical moves, right? Like that was a tactic to make it seem as if things were all right now following the Holocaust, right? And World War II. And it made me realize that means that empire can shake off Israel like that and bring in the Palestinian struggle as a way to whitewash its crimes. And I see that happening with the BRICS. I see China keeping a real low profile. Where does the art of war come from, right? Who knows deception, right? China to me is the greatest deceiver of I am watching them because I'm reading this book, right?
Hmm.
Right. We forget very, very quickly. We're not taught this. We have to go back into history that when the British Empire fell, a lot of the world was happy that the United States replaced it. The United States marketed itself as not being a colonial power, even though the entire thing is a colonial project, right? And so instead of using the word colonial, we're going to colonize you. Instead, we're going to develop you, right? We're going to develop you, right? And so then right now people are like, please, China, please be our great overlord, please, right? You never colonized anyone. Oh, I guess we don't know about Chinese history, right? Like we really need to be careful about how empire changes its face so that it can remain the same, right? So I see a possibility of a Palestinian leadership, and a Palestinian leadership like Mahmoud Abbas, all of them, like the old PLO, they have wanted empire to love them instead of the Zionists, right? It has been a battle over who's the most worthy of being with the empire's handmaiden or not. If Israel gets shaken off, and the US is not even like the head face of the empire, but the BRICS is, right? We can get a quote unquote free Palestine that will whitewash the new empire's face for the next generation or two. That's what I see as a possibility. So we need to be very careful.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, we could just let me know if you're going to do that YouTube thing, because
Yeah, I will. Well, I'll send you my, if y'all would like to subscribe to my newsletter, I'll send out links to the podcast. And it's on kiki.org. That's my website. And you just go to the bottom of the page.
Okay.
And subscribe there.
well, thank you, Kiki, and we hope it's not too long before we can have you again.
Yeah, it would be nice. Yeah. Really happy to be with you all.
Thank you so much. And that's QUIQUI.org.
QUIQUI.org.
Okay.
Yeah, so Can we all just say thank you to Kiki
Thank you,
today?
Kiki.
Very helpful.
We're ready for you, Kenichi.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I am so sorry. Linda, thank you very much. It's good to see you again. And I tried to have you come to our seminary to speak, but just, yeah, they pretty much did not provide any avenues. This is something that I I just don't know. I mean, I've challenged them. I said, Fuller is supposed to be one of the, the foremost place where difficult conversations take place and things that are highly relevant that intersects politics, theology, faith should take place. And there are students that are saying the same thing. But somehow, somewhere, I just could not get it passed by the senior administration, and so it's really regrettable. But thank you so much for your openness, and at least I could connect with you here and through your emails and so forth. The other thought that I have, and I'll make it brief, is I think you had mentioned, you have all painted for us, you have painted for all of us that capitalism really is the monster, the system that is creating and causing us humans to fight who's on the top, who's on the bottom, who should be eliminated because of what needs to be preserved. And then what I also heard from you, and this helps me because I told Pastor David, I shared with him many times. I said, when I'm listening to the Palestinians who are facing life and death situation every day, the South Lebanese who are facing, the last a year and a half of so-called ceasefire, but always, and it goes beyond that, but to be living in the atmosphere of violence and impunity of the Zionists, I cannot but feel extreme sympathy. And when I see, when the missiles from Iran comes and hits Tel Aviv, I could hear them rejoicing, dancing. And there's not a drop of me that would say, well, that's still violence. I join with them wholeheartedly. And I think you had said that, there's that transition where we don't get, we shouldn't get infected while being wise, and to see the deception and not to get deceived by the deception, but to learn to defend effectively, so that when these, if I could say, tools are not needed, we'll put them down and having created a community, a community of side by side, that together as humanity, demolishing boundaries and learning to take care of the environment, the earth, and so forth, that we humans can definitely create a new, society and new community, so that we can reflourish once again. And for me, I know that you had mentioned, this is the last thing, mentioned about your thoughts about the Chinese. My wife and I, obviously, we are from East Asia, so we are constantly looking at the landscape. And again, for what the United States have been doing all this time. Just to be honest, I do. There is a part of me that is wanting to see that de-dollarization and moving out of that, and to see the current hegemon come to its knees economically. And yes, I am also aware that we are fighting this monster called capitalism, and so I suppose we're at a different place, but at the same time we come to a collective like this where we process ideas, we encourage one another, we think critically, we strategize, and then dream together of a new community of human beings. So that was my take, and thank you so much. And I hope that you will find places where faith is where you can have a conversation of faith and what you specialize in your research and writing. And so thank you, Linda. So having said that, let's think of that. Let's as we come to the Lord's table, and I think this is something that Jesus was trying to encourage us, that there is there's a framework of thinking that the divine came outside of the framework and came into the framework to deliver people, so that the people could translate out from the system, outside of the system, to recreate, reimagine, and resettle, if you will, into a new community. And so with that, I want to encourage all of you, myself too, in a time that is so volatile and deathly, that we take this opportunity in taking the body of Christ and the blood of Christ, to say, yes, let's imagine a new world, a new community of human beings. So having said that, body of Christ broken for us, let's partake and eat. And the blood of Christ shed for us, let's partake. Amen. Thank you.